The first thing Clara learned about grief was that it had a sound. It was the sharp, final crack of a falling lodgepole pine, the one that had crushed Silas Vaughn's chest 6 months into their marriage. And then, it was the silence that followed. That silence had followed her from the logging camp, all the way back to her father's house. It was a silence thicker than wool, heavier than water. Her family, her father Josiah, her mother Miriam, her brother Thomas, were good, devout people. They lived by the book, and the book said a daughter's duty was to obey. Clara, at 19, had disobeyed. She had seen Silas Vaughn at the spring social, all easy smiles and restless energy, and she had run off with him to a traveling preacher before her father could promise her to the dry goods merchant in town, a man twice her age with snuff-stained teeth. Her family had not forgiven the elopement. They certainly did not forgive her for coming back a widow, a living, breathing monument to her own willfulness. Her sin, in their eyes, was not just marrying Silas. It was surviving him. For weeks, she existed in the margins of their home. She did her chores, her hands raw from the lye soap, and no one spoke to her. They spoke around her. Her father read passages from Leviticus at the dinner table, his eyes fixed on the wall above her head, his voice booming with judgment about wayward women and the wages of sin. Her mother's lips grew thinner, her face a mask of weary disapproval. Thomas just looked at her with a flat, cold scorn. He was the man of the house now, next to their father, and she had shamed him. Then, Reverend Davies came for supper. Clara served the stewed rabbit and cornbread, her eyes down, her hands shaking. She heard the low rumble of voices from the parlor after. Her father, the Reverend Thomas. She was not invited. She was only informed. "A situation has been arranged," her father announced, standing in the kitchen doorway. He did not look at her. He looked at the kettle on the stove. "Reverend Davies has found you a position, a place where you can make yourself useful and reflect on your choices." "A position?" Clara's voice was a dry whisper. "A man up in the Bighorns, a trapper. He lives alone. He requires a housekeeper for the winter." Clara's blood went cold. The Bighorns? In October? "Father, the snows!" "The Lord will provide," her father said, ending the matter. "Reverend Davies says the man is solitary, but decent. He owes the Reverend a favor. You will be that favor." Her mother packed her a small carpet bag, her old winter woolens, 2 shifts, a Bible she never read, and the mending kit. No photograph of Silas. They had burned the one she had. Her mother did not cry. Her face was just empty. "Be obedient, Clara," was all she said. Her brother Thomas was to take her. The ride took 2 days. The first day was through the foothills, crisp and gold with autumn. The second day, they climbed. The air grew thin and sharp, smelling of pine and frost. The trail narrowed to a deer track, winding up through massive shoulders of granite. The world below fell away, replaced by a brutal, empty expanse of rock and sky. Thomas did not speak to her the entire ride, not once. Late in the afternoon of the second day, he stopped his horse. "This is it." It was not a cabin. It was a burrow, dug back into the side of a hill, built of rock and thick, mud-chinked logs, with a low, sod roof. It looked as if the mountain had grown it. A thin curl of gray smoke rose from a chimney of river stones. A small lean-to sheltered a mule, who watched them with dull eyes. Thomas pulled her bag from his saddle. He did not help her down. She slid off the horse, her legs numb and trembling. She had been riding side saddle on a borrowed mare, and every bone in her body ached. Thomas walked to the low, heavy door and banged on it with his fist. It opened. Clara had seen big men, loggers, blacksmiths. But this man was not just big. He was part of the landscape. He seemed carved from the same granite as the peaks behind him. He was tall, wide through the shoulders, and wore buckskins that had seen years of hard use. His beard was thick, dark, and unruly, streaked with a little gray. His hair was long, tied back with a leather thong, but it was his eyes that held her. They were the color of a winter sky just before the sun breaks, a pale, cold gray. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Clara. His face showed nothing. No welcome, no surprise, nothing. "Reverend Davies sends her," Thomas said. His voice clipped. He shoved the carpet bag toward Clara's feet. "She's to keep the house. Your debt to the church is paid." The mountain man's eyes flicked back to Thomas. He nodded once, a slow, deliberate movement. Thomas turned, mounted his horse, and didn't look back. Clara watched him ride away, the sound of the hooves on the rocky trail getting smaller and smaller, until it was just the wind whistling through the pines. She was 19 years old. She was a widow, and she had just been left on a mountaintop with a stranger. She stood there, frozen, the wind pulling at her skirts. The carpet bag felt impossibly heavy at her feet. The man in the doorway hadn't moved. He just watched her. Finally, he grunted. It was a sound from deep in his chest. He stepped aside. Clara picked up her bag and ducked under the low lintel. The cabin was one room. It was dark and warmer than the air outside. It smelled of wood smoke, cured hides, pine resin, and something else, something sharp and male, like old iron and sweat. A stone hearth dominated one wall, a small fire glowing deep inside. A single cot was built into the far wall, covered in a mound of furs. There was a rough-hewn table, 2 stools, and shelves crowded with traps, jars, and tools she didn't recognize. Pelts were stretched on frames, leaning against the walls. It was the den of an animal, a working animal. He didn't introduce himself. He just pointed to the carpet bag. "Put it there." There was a patch of floor near the door. He walked back to the table, where he'd been working on a trap mechanism, the metal pieces gleaming in the firelight. He picked up a file and began to scrape, the shing, shing, shing of it filling the small space. Clara stood, her hands clenched, her bonnet still on. She didn't know what to do. "Heard you'd work," the man said, not looking up. His voice was a low rumble, rough as gravel. "Reverend's idea, not mine. Owed him for a burial. My partner, 2 seasons back. Now we're square." He put the file down and looked at her. His gaze was heavy, impersonal. It was the way he'd look at a deer, or the weather. "My name is Ewan McCrae. You'll earn your keep. There's a loft. Blankets are up there." He jerked his chin toward a crude ladder nailed to the wall. Clara looked up, a small, dark space under the rafters. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was too thin. He just grunted and went back to his trap. That first night was the longest of her life. She climbed the ladder. The loft was low. She couldn't stand. It was a small platform of boards, dusty and cold, with 2 folded stiff blankets. She could hear every sound below, the scrape of his knife as he ate, the thunk of his boots hitting the floor, the sigh of the cot as he laid his large frame down. And then the silence, filled only by the wind outside and the pop of the fire. She did not undress. She lay on top of the blankets, her coat still on, and stared into the darkness. She was terrified he would come up the ladder. He didn't even snore. He just breathed, a deep, slow sound that was as steady as the mountain itself. When she finally climbed down in the gray dawn, stiff and frozen, he was already gone. The fire was built up, and a kettle of water hung over it. The first few days were a tense, cold dance. They did not speak. He would be gone before she woke, and return at dusk, smelling of the outdoors, of pine and cold air, and sometimes of blood. He would bring rabbits, or grouse, or once, a haunch of venison from a deer he'd field-dressed far from the cabin. He would nod at her, drop his game by the door, and then tend to his traps or his rifle, cleaning them with meticulous, silent care. He avoided her. He never sat at the table when she did. He took his plate of whatever she'd managed to cook, thin stew, skillet bread, and sat on the stool by the fire, his back to her. He seemed to fill the cabin, his presence a physical weight, and yet he moved with a stillness that was almost frightening. He was a creature of the wilderness, and she was a house finch trapped in a bear's den. Clara, in turn, tried to make herself small. She did what she knew. She cleaned. The cabin was orderly in a man's way, but not clean. She swept the packed earth floor. She scrubbed his few iron pots with sand from the creek until her fingers were numb. She patched his torn wool shirt, her stitches small and neat. She cooked. She found his small store of provisions, a sack of flour, one of beans, salt, coffee, lard. She rationed them, her stomach clenching at how little there was. This was meant to last a winter? She tried not to cry. She failed, often, but only when he was gone. She would stand by the small, grease-papered window, looking out at the wall of trees, and the tears would freeze on her cheeks. She would scrub her face with icy water from the basin before she heard the crunch of his boots returning. She would not show him weakness. Her family had judged her weak. This man would not. On the 5th day, Ewan came back early, a brace of rabbits in his hand. He stopped in the doorway, sniffing the air. She had found wild onions near the creek bed and had made a thick rabbit stew from the day before, letting it simmer all afternoon. He looked at the pot. He looked at her. He served himself. He sat by the fire. He ate the whole bowl. He stood, ladled another helping, and ate that, too. He said nothing, but as he passed her to put the bowl in the wash basin, he dropped a small, dried apple on the table in front of her. It was shriveled and hard, but it was the first thing anyone had given her in months that wasn't a chore or a judgment. She slept near the fire that night. The loft was too cold. The wind was picking up, and the drafts up there were sharp. She'd asked, her voice trembling, "Mr. McCrae, would it be permissible if I slept by the hearth? The loft is very cold." He had just shrugged. "Floor's warmer. Suit yourself." He threw an extra pelt down for her, a soft, thick bearskin. She dragged it near the stones, wrapped herself in her own blanket, and fell into a restless, warmer sleep. She felt, for a moment, like a dog allowed inside. It was better than the loft. The routine set in. He would rise, stir the fire, and leave. She would rise, fetch water from the half-frozen creek, cook, clean, mend, and wait. The silence between them was a third person in the room, a cold guest. He hunted. He chopped wood. He seemed to be in a perpetual silent war with the coming winter, and he was winning. The woodpile outside grew into a fortress wall. He spent hours checking his traps, resetting them, his movements economical and precise. He was all function. One evening, he came back later than usual. The sky was a low, bruised purple, and the air had a strange, heavy stillness. He was crusted in snow, his beard stiff with ice. "It's here," he said, not to her, but to the room. He slammed the heavy bar across the door. That night, the storm hit. It was not like the gentle snows she knew below. This was a physical assault. The wind didn't whistle, it shrieked. It sounded like a woman screaming, a high, thin sound that tore at the nerves. The cabin shuddered. Snow blasted against the door and the window. A constant, dry hissing. Clara sat on the hearth, her knees drawn to her chest, watching Ewan. He was calm. He checked the chinking in the logs, stuffing a few rags into cracks she hadn't even seen. He laid more wood by the fire. He seemed untroubled, as if this was just a loud neighbor. It snowed for 3 days. They did not leave the cabin. The world shrank to the 4 walls, the sound of the wind, and the crackle of the fire. The small window was a sheet of white. They were buried. The closeness was unbearable. She was acutely aware of him, the way he smelled, the sound of his breathing, the quiet scrape of his knife as he carved a piece of wood, the shavings falling onto the floor. He seemed to be carving a small animal, but she couldn't tell what. They barely spoke. "More wood?" he'd ask. "Yes, please," she'd whisper. On the third morning, the wind stopped. The silence that fell was shocking. It was as total and profound as the silence of her family's home, but it felt different, cleaner. Ewan spent an hour digging at the door with a shovel. When he finally forced it open, a cascade of snow fell inside. He stepped out. Clara followed him to the doorway and gasped. The world was gone. Everything was white, a smooth, sculpted, dazzling white. The trees were heavy ghosts. The woodpile was adrift. The mule's lean-to was almost completely buried, just the very top of its roof visible. There was no path, no trail, no mountains, just a sea of white. Ewan squinted at the sky, then at the deep, deep snow. He looked at the narrow pass they had ridden up. It was gone, not just covered, it was filled. An avalanche had slid, filling the ravine with what looked to be 30 feet of snow and rock and splintered trees. "Well," he rumbled, his breath pluming in the frigid air. "That's that." Clara clutched her shawl. "What is?" He turned his pale gray eyes on her, the first time he had truly looked at her. "Nothing in or out, not till spring." He said it as a fact, like stating the sun rises or the water is wet. Clara stared at the wall of snow that had once been a pass. "Till spring." March, maybe April, that was 4-5 months. Her brother knew. When he had left her here, he knew the storm was coming. He knew the pass would close. Her father knew, the Reverend, with his talk of charity. They had all known. This wasn't a position. This wasn't a place to reflect. It was a grave. They had sent her here to be buried, one way or another. To be forgotten. To be erased. She was the living evidence of their shame, and they had scrubbed the stain clean. A cold so deep it burned started in her belly and spread to her limbs. It had nothing to do with the snow. It was the ice of abandonment. She had survived Silas. She had survived her family's scorn. Now, she was trapped on top of the world with a silent, giant stranger, and no one on earth, knew or cared if she lived or died. She looked at Ewan McCrae, who was already turning to get his shovel, his mind on digging out the mule. He was not her keeper. He was not her protector. He was just the man who happened to be in the tomb with her. She turned and walked back inside the dark cabin, the smell of smoke and old iron filling her lungs. She realized, utterly and completely alone, the last thread of hope, the one that whispered she might be able to earn her way back, that her family might one day relent, snapped. It made no sound at all. That knowledge, that she had been truly abandoned, settled in Clara's bones like the winter itself. It was a cold, hard thing, but it did not make her shatter. The tears froze inside her. Grief for Silas was a hot, sharp pain. Her family's scorn was a dull, bruising shame. But this final cutting off was something else. It was an anchor. It meant there was no one to cry for, no one to appeal to. No one was coming. If she was to live, it would be her own doing. The next morning, she woke with this cold resolve. Ewan was already gone. She looked around the small, dim cabin. It was not a prison. It was a shelter, and she would earn her place in it. She began to work not just to fill the time, but to survive. She took stock of the food. Half a sack of flour, maybe 30 pounds. A 20-pound sack of pinto beans. A large tin of lard, salt. A small bag of coffee beans. A half-dozen shriveled onions. It was nothing. It was starvation, stretched out over 4 months. She rationed it in her mind. A cup of beans a day, boiled for hours. A skillet of bread every other day. Coffee was a luxury. They would have it once a week. The rest would depend on him, on Ewan. on what he could bring in from the frozen world outside. She took his mending pile. It was not the soft wool and cotton of her old life. It was stiff, greasy buckskin and thick wool shirts that smelled of smoke and sweat. Her fine needle snapped. She found his awl and a reel of thick sinew thread and taught herself to stitch his clothes, her fingers clumsy and sore, pushing the needle through the tough hide. She mended until her hands were raw. The wind found every crack. The cabin, for all its solid rock, leaked cold. The mud chinking had shrunk and fallen away in places. She saw him rub his shoulder one night, a stiffness from the draft that hit his cot. The next day, while he was gone, she mixed a bucket of mud from the creek bank, having to break the ice to get to it, and mixed it with dry grasses. She packed the cracks, her hands turning a numb, painful blue. But the cabin was warmer that night. Ewan noticed. He said nothing, but when he came in, he didn't just glance at her. He looked. He saw the mud under her nails, the weariness in her shoulders. He saw the neat, strong stitches on his glove. He saw the way she measured the handful of beans into the pot. Not a one wasted. He began to leave her more wood, stacked just inside the door, so she wouldn't have to go out in the deep snow. He left a sharp skinning knife on the table after he brought in 2 rabbits, a silent offering. She took it and taught herself to skin and dress them, the work bloody and grim. But she did not flinch. She was feeding them. She was surviving. He watched her. He watched her quiet endurance. She did not complain. She did not weep, at least not where he could see. She did not shrink from the hard, ugly work. She just did it. He had seen men in the war, new recruits, break under half the strain. This girl, soft and small, was made of something colder, something like the mountain itself. He began to feel a sliver of respect, a feeling so old he barely recognized it. One afternoon, she was frying the last of the deer meat. The lard was spitting fierce in the heavy iron skillet. She was tired, her mind fogged by the monotony of snow and silence. When she turned the meat, a glob of hot grease leaped from the pan and landed on the back of her hand. She hissed, a sharp intake of breath, and dropped the fork. She clutched her hand to her chest, biting her lips so hard she tasted blood. The pain was white-hot, a sudden, bright agony. Ewan was at the table, oiling his rifle. He was on his feet in one silent movement. "Let me see." His voice was not a request. "It is nothing," she whispered, her eyes watering. He took her wrist. His grip was firm, inescapable. His hands were huge, scarred and calloused, but his touch was not rough. He turned her hand over, his thumb brushing the skin. A raw, red patch was already blistering, angry and white around the edges. "Fool thing," he rumbled. It was not clear if he meant her, or the skillet, or the situation. He kept her wrist and led her to a small, dusty tin on his shelf. He opened it. Inside was a dark, thick salve that smelled of pine and beeswax. He dipped 2 fingers in, his touch surprisingly careful, and spread the salve over the burn. It was cool, and immediately eased the fire. "That's bear grease," he said, his voice quiet. "And comfrey. Keep it clean." He let go of her hand. The moment was over, but it left an echo. It was the first time they had touched, and he had been gentle. He had been careful. That night, the silence felt different. It was less empty. He sat on his stool by the fire, sharpening his knife. Clara sat on her bearskin, nursing her hand. "You've got a steady hand," she said, her voice small. He grunted. He tested the blade on his thumb. Mr. McCrae?" "Ewan," he said, not looking up. The sound of his own name seemed strange in the room. "Ewan, were you a doctor?" He stopped sharpening. He stared into the fire. "No." A long pause. "Infantry. But you learn to patch things. Men, mules, yourself." He touched his right ear, a habit she'd seen before. "Learned that in Virginia, near Petersburg. A mine. He was quiet for so long. She thought he was done, but he continued, his voice low, pulling the words from a place he kept locked. We dug, they dug, Yanks. We were in the trench. Jonah, he was my friend. From back home, he was telling a joke about a chicken. Ewan shook his head. A small, pained movement. Then the world just blew up, dirt and fire and screaming. He looked at his hands. Woke up. I was buried. Dug myself out. This ear. He pointed. Nothing but ringing. Still rings. Found Jonah. He was in pieces, but he was still breathing. He looked at me. Ewan's voice went rough. He looked right at me, and he died. Right there. Held him. He just stopped. He was quiet. He put his knife down. So, no, not a doctor. Clara watched him. His broad back, the tension in his shoulders. He had shared his scar. The silence that followed was heavy with it. I am sorry, she whispered. He just nodded. A few nights later, she found the courage to offer her own. My family, she said, her voice shaking. They did not send me here for charity? Ewan glanced at her. He was lacing a snowshoe frame. They sent me here to be rid of me. They told the Reverend I was a burden, a shame. My sin was marrying Silas without my father's blessing. She looked at her own hands, twisting in her lap. When Silas died, his mother, she told me I was a curse. She said my willfulness brought the judgment down on him. She burned our wedding picture. She said she never wanted to see my face again. She has his family. I have no one. She finally said it aloud. I have no home to return to. Ewan stopped his work. He looked at her, his gaze level. He saw the same thing in her that she now saw in him. They were both survivors of a different kind of war, both exiled. He nodded, a slow recognition. Well, you're here now. It was not a comfort. Exactly, it was a fact. But it was a fact that included her. She was not just a burden he had to endure. She was here, with him. The days grew shorter, the cold more bitter. The world outside was a white desert. The only movement was the snow falling, or the smoke rising, or Ewan moving through the drifts. One afternoon, he came back, and his face was tight. He was not a man who showed emotion, but she saw it, a cold, dark anger. What is it? Lion, a big one. Got the mule. Clara's hand went to her mouth. The mule. She had heard it braying in the night. No, he clarified, his voice flat. Not my mule. A goat. I had tethered up the ridge. For bait. Bait? For wolves or cats. Now the cat's been fed. It'll stay close. He checked his rifle. His movements quick. Efficient. Means it's bold. Hungry. He pulled his heavy coat on. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it. Not till you hear my knock. 3 solid, then 1. Got it? You are going out? Now? It is almost dark. Got to. Can't have it that close to the cabin. It knows there's food here. He grabbed his powder horn. It'll be back. He left. She slid the heavy wooden bar into place. The sound of it thudding home was terribly final. The cabin was suddenly, terrifyingly empty. His silence had been a presence, a weight. Now, his absence was a hollow fear. The wind howled, the fire popped. Every sound made her jump. She imagined a great tawny body leaping onto the sod roof, claws scratching. She had been afraid of him. Now, she was afraid for him. She paced. She sat. She tended the fire. Hours passed. The darkness was total. She had no clock, but she knew it was deep in the night. She stared at the door, praying to a God she no longer trusted, praying for the sound of his knock. 3 solid, then 1. She must have drifted into a doze, sitting on the hearth, because the sound shocked her awake. Thud, thud, thud. A pause. Thud. She scrambled to the door, her hands shaking, and pulled the bar. Ewan fell in, more than walked. He was covered in snow, his beard frozen. He was dragging something. A huge, tawny pelt. The mountain lion. It was massive, its head as big as a bucket. "Ewan," she breathed, relief making her weak. He was breathing hard. He had a long, bloody scratch on his forearm, where the cat must have caught him as it died. "He's done. Won't be bothering us." She rushed to get a cloth and water. "You are hurt." "It is just a scratch." He shrugged her off, but he was exhausted. He sat heavily on the stool, letting the rifle fall to his side. She cleaned the wound anyway. He let her. His arm was thick with muscle. The skin was hot. "You were gone so long," she whispered, her hands trembling as she tied the bandage. He looked at her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a fear that was not for herself. He had seen that look before, too, on Jonah's face, right before the mine. "I came back," he said. The long nights of winter locked them in. There was nothing to do after the chores were done but sit by the fire. The silence began to feel like a waste. Clara had found his books, a well-worn Bible, a copy of Shakespeare, and a tattered book on the plants of the high country. "Mr. Ewan," she asked one night, "would it bother you if I read aloud?" He was stitching a trap line. Words are just words. So she read. She started with the book on plants. Her voice, at first thin and hesitant, grew stronger. She read about yarrow and willow bark, about how to make a poultice. He would nod sometimes. "My PA used willow for the fever," he'd mutter. Then she read Shakespeare. She read The Tempest. She did not understand all of it, but she loved the sound. He would listen, his hands busy, but his mind clearly on the words. "That's what this place is," he said, when she finished one night. "What's past is prologue. Nothing matters. What came before, just what you do now." She looked at him, surprised by his insight. They began to talk, not about their deep wounds, but about small things, about the way the snow sounded when it fell, about books, about what the silence did to a person's mind. "It makes you think too much," she said. "Or not at all," he replied. "Lets you just be like a rock." Another storm hit, worse than the first. It pinned them inside for 4 days. The wind was a living thing, a monster trying to tear the roof from the cabin. On the 3rd night, Clara fell asleep and dreamed. She was back in her father's house. He was standing over her, his face dark with fury. He was reading from the Bible, his voice a roar, but the words were not from the book. They were words of her own failure. Harlot, disgrace, curse. Her brother Thomas was there, and Silas's mother, all pointing. She tried to run, but her feet were stuck. She woke up with a sharp, choked cry, sitting bolt upright on her bearskin. The cabin was dark, save for the low, red glow of the fire's embers. The wind was screaming. She was shaking, her heart pounding. "You're all right." His voice came from the darkness. She saw his shape. He was not on his cot. He was sitting on the stool, a blanket around his shoulders, watching the fire. He had been there all along. "A bad dream," she whispered, ashamed. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just sat there. He didn't tell her to go back to sleep. He didn't offer false comfort. He just sat, a quiet guardian in the dark, bearing witness to her terror. He stayed there until her breathing slowed, until the shaking stopped, until the gray light of a snow-choked dawn began to filter through the window. She had never felt so safe in her life. Their closeness grew like a seed under the snow. It was not physical. He never touched her, not since the burn. He never looked at her with anything but that level, neutral gaze. But it was an intimacy born of shared air, shared fear, shared survival. She knew the sound of his breathing. She knew he preferred his coffee bitter. He knew she was afraid of the dark, and so he always left the fire with one good log on it to burn through the night. It was an emotional rawness. They were two people stripped down to nothing but who they were. No family, no past, just the man and the woman in the small, warm room, with the world trying to kill them outside. A few days later, a brief thaw came. The sun was bright, and the snow on the roof began to melt, dripping past the window. Clara went to the creek to get water. The path Ewan had shoveled was slick with ice. She was carrying 2 heavy wooden buckets, her feet slipping. She fell hard, the buckets flying, the icy water splashing her skirts. He was there before she could even try to stand. He grabbed her arm and pulled her up. Easy. He picked up the buckets, his face set. She stood there, trembling, feeling foolish. "I am sorry, I spilled the water." He looked at her wet skirts that would freeze in minutes, at her chapped, red face. He took the buckets. "Go inside. Clara, get dry. I'll fetch the water." She stopped. He had never, not once, called her by her name. It was always you or girl, or just silence. Clara. It sounded like a different word in his mouth. Solid. Real. He walked past her, his boots crunching on the snow, down to the creek. She stood and watched him go. He had called her Clara. He saw her. She was not a burden. She was not a ghost. She was Clara, and she was in this frozen, forgotten place. Finally, home. That word, Clara, changed the air in the cabin. It had been Ewan's and the girls. Now, it was Ewan's and Clara's. It was a proper place, with proper names. The silence that fell between them now was different. It was not an empty silence, a void. It was a shared quiet. It was comfortable. He began to trust her, not just to cook his food or mend his clothes. He began to trust her with himself. One bright, cold morning, when the sun was so bright on the snow it hurt the eyes, he took his rifle from the wall. It was his Springfield, the one he'd carried out of Virginia. He'd kept it meticulously clean. "Come," he said. She followed him outside. The air was so still. It felt like glass. He led her to a clearing, a small space between the cabin and the high, impassive wall of pines. He pointed to a dead tree, at a black, weeping knot of sap. "That's your mark. You're going to learn this." Clara looked at the rifle. It was long and heavy, the wood dark and oiled, the metal a dull, deadly gray. "Ewan, I have never held a firearm." "I know," he said. "That's why you're learning." He held it out to her. "I'm gone most of the day. That lion, it wasn't the only one. There's wolves, there's other men, sometimes trappers. Some are fine. Some are not. You ain't helpless. Clara, you just ain't been taught." This was the most he had ever said to her at one time. It was a speech. She took the rifle. The weight of it shocked her, pulling her arms down. It was a tool of such terrible purpose. He stood behind her. She could feel the heat of his body in the cold air. He did not touch her, but he was close. "Tuck it in, hard, against your shoulder, right there. If it's loose, it'll break your bone. Hold it tight." She did, the curved metal butt plate cold and hard against her wool coat. "This is the lock. This is the hammer. This is the trigger. Don't you touch this." He tapped the trigger. "Till you're ready to kill what's in front of you. Understand?" "Yes." He showed her how to load. The ritual of it, powder horn, the small, measured pour, the patch, the lead ball, the ramrod, pushing it down, thunk, thunk, seating the charge. It was a careful, deliberate dance. "It's loaded. Now, pull the hammer. Half cock. Now, full." The click-click was the sharpest sound she had ever heard. "Line it up. The sight at the end. Put it on the knot. Breathe out and squeeze. Don't jerk." She squinted down the long barrel. The knot seemed to wobble. She held her breath. She squeezed. The explosion was deafening. The rifle kicked like a mule, slamming into her shoulder and throwing her back a step. She cried out, more from shock than pain. The world was full of smoke, stinking of sulfur, and her ears were ringing. She had missed the tree entirely. "Again," Ewan said, his voice calm. He did not raise his voice. He did not criticize. He just waited. He made her load it herself this time. Her hands were shaking. She spilled some of the powder. "Steady," he said. His voice was a low rumble. He put his large hand on her shoulder, not to comfort, but to steady her, to anchor her. "It's just a tool. You tell it what to do, not the other way." She loaded, she aimed, she fired. This time, she hit the trunk, 6 inches low. Again. She did it 10 times. By the last shot, her shoulder was a deep, throbbing ache. Her cheek was raw, but she was no longer afraid of the sound. She was no longer afraid of the power. She breathed out, she squeezed, and the lead ball hit the knot dead center. A small puff of black bark flew from the tree. Clara lowered the rifle, her arms trembling with effort. She looked at Ewan. He nodded, a small, slow movement. "Good," he said. "Good enough." He took the rifle from her, his expression unreadable, but he had trusted her with his rifle. He had trusted her with his defense. He had trusted her with his life. Their partnership deepened. The cabin was a shared den. She was cleaning one afternoon, sweeping the packed earth floor around his cot, a place she usually avoided. Tucked beneath it, in a small, oiled leather satchel, was a book. It was not a printed book. It was bound in leather, and the pages were filled with neat, faded brown ink. A journal. She felt a hot flush of shame, as if she'd been caught spying. She pushed it back, but her hand lingered. This was his. This was the part of him he kept buried, the part that had made him this silent, stone man. She could not bring herself to open it. She pulled it out, but she kept it closed. She put it on the rough table, right where he sat, and waited. He came in at dusk, snow clinging to his beard. He saw the journal. He stopped. The air in the cabin went still. He looked at her, his eyes cold for the first time in weeks. "I was sweeping," she said, her voice a whisper. "It was under the cot. I did not open it." He stared at the book. He stared at her. He saw the truth in her face. She had not pried. She had brought it into the light and left the choice to him. He picked it up. His thumb stroked the worn leather. "It's just old words," he said. He tossed it back on the table, as if it were nothing, but it was not nothing. "Ewan," she said, her voice quiet. "When I read the Shakespeare, I like the sound of the words, but sometimes I think you do not hear all of them. Your ear—" He nodded, wary. "Maybe," she said, gesturing to the journal, "maybe I could read that, to you, so you could hear your own words again." It was the right thing to say. She was not asking to know his secrets. She was offering to return them to him. He sat on his stool by the fire, his back to her. It was the only way he could do it. "Page 42, he rumbled. "If you must." She opened it. The handwriting was careful. "June 19th, 1864, she read. "Virginia, it is hot. The heat is worse than the shelling. Jonah traded his coffee for a piece of tobacco. Says it keeps the hunger off. I think it just makes him spit. Wrote a letter to his ma. Did not tell her about the dysentery. No use in worrying her. Sky is yellow." She read on. She read lists of marches, of rations, of the names of men who had died. It was a flat, emotionless accounting of hell. Then she got to the part he'd told her about. "July 30th, she read, her voice trembling. "The mine. They blew it. The ground. It came up. God, the ringing. The ringing. I cannot hear. Dug out. Woke up buried. Jonah. Oh God, Jonah. He was... She stopped. The next line was just a long, black smear of ink, where his hand had shaken so badly the pen had torn the page. "That's enough," Ewan said. His voice was choked. He was staring into the fire, his hands clenched on his knees. She closed the book. She did not speak. She put it back on the table. He had let her in. He had let her walk with him, in that place of smoke and thunder and the ringing in his ears. He took to carving more. He was always whittling, making trap pegs or a new handle for his knife. But now, he began to carve other things. He sat by the fire, his knife moving with a slow, careful grace, and the shavings would fall around his feet. A few nights after she had read from his journal, he finished a piece. He'd been working on it for a week, holding it close, hiding it in his hand. He rubbed it with a bit of lard to make the wood glow, and then he held it out to her. He said nothing. He just held it out. She put down the shirt she was mending and took it. It was a small animal, carved from a piece of light pine. It was an elk. The detail was not fine, but it was perfect. The turn of its head, as if it were listening. The tiny, delicate legs. The small, proud rack of antlers. It was warm from his hand. "Ewan," she whispered. It was beautiful. It was the first gift, the first object of pure, simple beauty. She had been given in memory. "Just a piece of wood," he muttered, his face red. He turned away, embarrassed by his own tenderness, and picked up his knife to find a new piece. Clara held the small elk. She ran her thumb over the smooth wood. This giant, rough man had seen this tiny, graceful thing inside a block of pine. He had seen it, and he had set it free, and he had given it to her. She put it on the mantel, a small, pale shape in the firelight, her first treasure. The gift unlocked something in her. He had shared his worst memory. He had given her a piece of his art. She had to give him something in return. The truth. "Silas," she said into the quiet that night. Ewan looked up from his work. "My husband, his name was Silas." She had not said his name aloud since she'd come to the cabin. "My family, they were right about him, in a way, but they were wrong, too." Ewan waited, his hands still. "He was not a bad man. He was not cruel, like my father can be. He was just young. He had so many dreams. We were going to go to Oregon. He was going to build me a house with a painted porch. He smiled all the time." She looked down at her hands, at the mending. But he was weak. The dreams would last until payday. Then he would be at the saloon, with the other loggers. He would buy rounds. He would play cards. And he would lose. He always lost. Ewan nodded. He knew that kind of man. The war was full of them. "He would come home," she whispered. "And he would be so sorry. He would cry. He would hold me and tell me he was a terrible man. And I believed him. I believed he was sorry. And I believed I could save him. I thought if I just loved him enough, he would be strong. That my love would be a shield. That it would be enough to make him the man he promised to be." She looked up, her eyes meeting Ewan's across the small room. "He died in that logging accident before I had to find out I was wrong, before I learned that love cannot save a man who does not want to save himself. Maybe that was a kindness. That is a terrible thing for a widow to think. Is it not?" Ewan put down his carving. He looked at her, this young woman who had seen the weakness in others, and in herself. He saw her shame. "No," he said, his voice rough. "It ain't terrible. It's just the truth." He held her gaze. "Some folks are broken. You can't mend them. You can only mend yourself." The winter held. A false thaw came in late February, melting the top layer of snow, which then froze again overnight. The world became a sheet of slick, hard ice. It was treacherous. Clara was carrying a small load of wood from the high, dwindling wood pile. She was walking carefully, but her worn boots could find no purchase. Her foot slipped. She went down hard. She tried to catch herself, but she fell against the sawbuck, where a piece of split pine. sharp as a razor, was leaning. The pain was instant, a bright, searing line of fire up her leg. But it was the wetness that terrified her. She looked down. Her thick wool skirt was already turning dark, a deep, dark red. She tried to call his name, but the shock had stolen her breath. She managed only a high, thin sound, a gasp. He heard it. Ewan was inside, sharpening his skinning knife. He heard the cry and the thud. He was out the door in a second. He saw her on the ice. He saw the blood. He had seen men shot. He had seen his friend Jonah bleed out in the mud. He had not panicked then. He had been cold. He panicked now. His face went white. The blood on the snow. It was too much. It was too fast. "Clara!" He crossed the ice in 2 strides and scooped her up. He did not ask if she was hurt. He carried her inside, his heart pounding a sick rhythm against his ribs. He kicked the door shut. On the table, now. He laid her flat. "Show me." "Ewan, I am all right," she stammered, her teeth chattering. "Show me!" he roared, his voice cracking with a terror that sounded like rage. He did not wait. He took his knife and slit her skirt from hem to hip. Modesty was a luxury for a world that was not dying. The cut was long, from her knee to her upper thigh. It was deep, frighteningly deep. It was not spurting. Thank God, she had missed the artery, but it was bleeding, a fast, steady, dark welling. "Hold this," he commanded. He grabbed a clean flour sack, wadded it, and pressed it into her hand. "Press down. Hard. Do not let go. Do you hear me?" She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. He moved with a frantic, desperate energy. He stoked the fire, threw the kettle on. He grabbed his small tin box, the one with his suture needle, the one he used for his own wounds, and a reel of sinew. He dropped the needle in the boiling water. He grabbed the whiskey bottle from the shelf. He knelt by her head. "This is going to hurt, more than you've ever hurt." He uncorked it and put it to her lips. "Drink." She coughed and sputtered, but she drank. The fiery liquid burned down her throat. Again. She drank again, tears streaming down her face. He took the rag and poured the rest of the whiskey over the wound. Clara screamed, a high, terrible sound that echoed in the small cabin. "I am sorry," Ewan whispered, his voice tight. "I am sorry." He took the needle from the water. "Do not look. Hold on to the table." He began to sew, his huge, scarred hands, which could carve a delicate elk, now moved with a quick, brutal efficiency. He pushed the needle through her skin, pulled it tight, knotted it. "Push, pull, knot." She was sobbing, clutching the table, her knuckles white. He did not look at her face. He just looked at the wound. He stitched her skin back together, his own hands shaking so badly he could barely thread the needle for the last stitch. When he was done, he was covered in sweat. He bandaged her leg tightly with torn strips of a clean shift. He was trembling. He gently, so gently, lifted her from the table. She was pale, her eyes half closed from the shock and the whiskey. He carried her to his cot. He laid her down and covered her with every fur he owned. He did not sleep that night. He did not move to his stool. He sat on the hard, cold floor, his back against the wall, his knees drawn up, and he watched her. The fever came, as he knew it would. She tossed. She whimpered. She called for Silas. She called for her mother. Ewan stayed. He bathed her face with a cool cloth. He forced sips of water between her lips, and he whispered. He did not know he was doing it. "It's all right. You're safe. I am here. Just rest, Clara. Just rest. I am here." He watched the rise and fall of her chest, terrified it would stop. He had been alone for so long. He had made his peace with it. He had not known, until he saw her blood on the snow, that he was no longer alone, and he realized, with a cold, terrifying certainty, that he could not go back. If she died, she would take the world with her. he would be left in the dark. He sat there, his rifle across his lap, guarding her, not from the wolves, not from the winter, but from the death he felt creeping in the corners of the room, and he trembled. She was sick for 3 days. He did not leave the cabin. He did not hunt. They ate cold flour paste. He just watched. On the 4th morning, he was asleep, his head finally slumped forward onto his knees. He woke to a light touch on his hair. He jerked awake. Clara was watching him. Her eyes were clear. The fever was gone. Her face was pale and thin, but she was looking at him. "Ewan," she whispered. Her throat was raw. He could not speak. The relief that washed over him was so powerful, it left him weak. He just stared at her. She struggled to sit up. I am—" "Easy," he rasped, his voice thick. He helped her, propping her against the wall. She looked at him. His face was gray with exhaustion. His beard was matted. He looked as broken as she felt. And she knew. She knew he had not just stitched her body. He had stood guard over her soul. She had no words. There were no words for what he had done. So she leaned. She was weak, but she leaned her head forward, just enough to rest it against his broad, solid chest. She felt the heavy, steady thump of his heart under her cheek. He went completely still. He had not been touched with simple affection in 10 years. He did not know what to do. He was afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the moment. Slowly, his arm came up, the one that was not braced against the floor. He hesitated, his hand hovering over her back. Then, he let it rest. He put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her, just slightly, closer. It was the first time they had held each other. It was not passion. It was not desire. It was something far more powerful. It was the embrace of 2 people who had nothing left and had found, in each other, everything they needed to survive. They sat like that for a long time, her head on his chest, his arm around her. The morning sun finally, breaking through the snow-caked window. She healed slowly. He fed her broth. He kept the fire roaring. He would not let her leave the cot. A week later, she was sitting up, mending a tear in her own skirt. He had moved her bearskin and her blankets, and she now sat propped against the wall on his cot. He sat on his stool. The balance was almost normal, but everything had changed. He was watching her, his face quiet. She was mending, her head bent, the firelight catching the chestnut color of her hair. He was overwhelmed by the simple, profound fact of her. She was alive. She was here. He stood up. He walked to the cot. He knelt on the floor. A king kneeling to a commoner, a bear bowing to a finch. She looked up, startled, her needle poised. "Ewan, is something wrong?" He shook his head. He did not speak. He reached out and took her hand, the one she had burned. The scar was a pale, silver mark on her skin. He brought it to his lips. He did not kiss her fingers. He turned her hand over and pressed his mouth to the center of her palm. It was not a brief, chaste kiss. It was a long, warm, reverent press. His beard was rough against her skin, his lips impossibly soft. It was a kiss that pledged allegiance. He pulled back, and his eyes were full of a raw, terrible vulnerability. He had done it. He had crossed the line. He had shown her the animal inside. The need. He was ashamed. "Clara, I am sorry," he rasped. Forgive me. I should not have—" He began to pull away, to stand up, to retreat back into the safety of his silence. "No," she whispered, her fingers curled, trapping his. "Please, do not be sorry." He looked at her. Her eyes were shining with tears. "Ewan," she said, her voice shaking. "I was married, but I have never, ever been kissed like that before." Silas's kisses had been wet and fast, the fumbling of a boy. This was the devotion of a man. The tension in the room was so thick, she could not breathe. He was still kneeling. She was still holding his hand. That night, the old problem returned. She was stronger, but the floor was dangerously cold. He could not let her sleep there, not with her leg healing. "You'll take the cot," he said, his voice flat. "I'll take the floor." "No," she said. "You have not slept in your own bed in a week. You are stiff. You need your rest to hunt. I will not have you on the floor." "And I will not have you get sick," he countered. They looked at each other, and they looked at the cot. It was narrow, built for one man, but it was wider than the floor. "My father," Clara said, blushing a deep, painful red. "When we traveled, sometimes we all shared a bed in the wagon, for warmth. It is only for warmth. Ewan—" He looked at her, his gray eyes dark. "Aye," he said, his voice thick. "Warmth." It was impossibly awkward. He laid down first, on his side, his back to her, facing the cold stone wall. She slipped under the furs, her mended legs stiff. She lay on her back, her hands folded on her chest, as stiff as a corpse. There was a foot of space between them. They did not speak. But the night was long. The fire burned low, and the cold crept in. In the deep, dark hours, sleep took them, and in sleep, bodies seek heat. Clara woke. She was not cold. She was warmer than she had ever been. She was on her side, her back pressed against a wall of solid muscle. Ewan, in his sleep, he had turned, and she had rolled toward him. His body was a furnace. One of his heavy arms was draped over her waist, his hand resting on her hip. His breathing was a deep, slow rumble against her hair. She lay perfectly still. She should move. She should be frightened. She should be ashamed. She was none of those things. She felt planted, anchored, safe. She did not move. She let his weight hold her. She let his warmth soak into her. This was not the quick, selfish heat of Silas. This was the slow, steady burn of a deep, protected fire. She closed her eyes and let herself sink into it. They did not speak of it in the morning, but the next night, there was no pretense. They lay down. He faced the wall. She faced his back, and in the night, they found each other. The desire was there. It was in the air they breathed. It was in the way his hand lingered when he passed her the coffee. It was in the way her eyes followed him as he moved, stalking the fire. It was in the sudden, sharp awareness of his leg brushing hers in the cot. It was unspoken. It was powerful, and it was terrifying. It was a hunger, slow and deep, and they were both waiting, half in hope, half in fear, for the winter to finally break. It was the sound of dripping that woke them. For months, the world had been silent, muffled by snow, a place of hisses and whistles. Now, it was a world of drips, water running, the crack of ice falling from the branches, the gurgle of the creek, fighting its way out from under the frozen shelf. Spring was not coming. It was attacking. It was March, and a warm wind. A Chinook had blown up from the south, and it was eating the winter alive. Inside the cabin, the thaw was of a different kind. It was just as fragile, and just as dangerous. They shared the cot every night. They lay back to back, then, in the cold hours, turned toward each other. A slow, unconscious migration. Finding warmth, Ewan's arm would settle over her waist, his hand resting on her hip. Her head would find the hollow of his shoulder. They would wake like that, tangled in the furs, warm and breathing the same air. And then the day would begin. The tension would snap back. They would move apart, suddenly, as if caught. They would not speak of it, but the unspoken was a living thing in the room. Desire was in the way he watched her, his gray eyes dark. When she bent to the fire, it was in the way she held her breath when his hand brushed hers as they passed the coffee mug. They were two people in a small, small room, who knew each other's scars, who had seen each other's deepest wounds, and who were now achingly aware of each other's bodies. He was a man. She was a woman. The winter had made them partners. The spring was making them something else. He was gentle. He would chop the wood, but stack it closer to the door. He would bring her the first tough, green shoots of wild onion he found near the creek. He carved her a small, clumsy-looking bird, and she set it on the mantel next to the elk. She stitched his moccasins, the sinew pulling tight, her work as strong as his now. They were a family, a strange, silent, two-person family. Clara had begun to forget, almost, that another world existed. The mountain was her home. The cabin was her home. Ewan was her home. She was, for the first time in her life, happy. It was a quiet, tough happiness, like the green shoots pushing up through the snow. But it was real. Then the world came back. It came in the form of a man named Jedediah Potts. He was a trapper, a thin, wiry man with a face like dried leather and a smell of beaver musk that filled the cabin. He was the first human being, other than Ewan, that Clara had seen in 5 months. He was on his way up to check his high country lines. Ewan saw his smoke and went out to meet him. It was the law of the mountain. You shared coffee, you shared news. Clara stayed inside, her heart pounding. The sound of a new voice, a fast-talking, high-pitched voice, was shocking. Ewan came back an hour later. Jedediah was gone. Ewan did not look at her. He walked to the fireplace. He picked up the poker and jabbed at the logs. The easy warmth that had been growing between them was gone. The air was cold. "What is it, Ewan?" Clara asked. He was too still. He was the way he had been when the lion had come. "A trapper," Ewan said, his voice flat. He was not looking at her. He was looking into the fire. He passed through town, Laramie, and heard a man asking about the pass, asking about me, asking about a girl. Clara's hand went to her throat. "Your brother," Ewan said. "Thomas, he says he is coming for you. Soon as the pass is clear, Jed says, it is clear enough, if you are desperate." Clara went cold. The world she had forgotten had remembered her. She looked at Ewan's back. It was a wall of stone. This was the moment. This was the moment he would turn and say, "Let him come. This is your home. You are not leaving." This was the moment he would claim her. She waited. Ewan said nothing. He just stared into the fire. "Ewan?" she whispered. He put the poker down. He turned, and his face was the one she had seen when he first opened the door. Blank, cold, closed. "You should pack your things," he said. His voice was a rasp. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. It was a physical sensation, as if she were falling. "What?" "He is your blood, your family. He is coming for you. You will go back." "Go back," she said, her voice trembling. "Go back to what? They threw me away. Ewan, this is my home." "This is not a home," Ewan said, his voice harsh. "This is a hole in the ground. You are a young woman. You deserve a town, a proper life. Not this, not me." "I do not want a proper life," she cried, the tears coming hot and fast. "I want this. I want you." He flinched, as if she had struck him. He took a step back. He was retreating. She could see him pulling into himself, into that cold, safe place where nothing could touch him. "You are a girl," he said, his voice brutal. "You do not know what you want. You are grateful. That is all. You survived. Now you will go live." "Grateful?" she said, stunned. "You think this is gratitude?" "I have to check the traps," he said, grabbing his rifle. He would not meet her eyes. He would not look at her. He was gone. He did not come back that night until long after she was in the cot, and he did not get in with her. He unrolled his old bedding and lay down by the fire, his back to her. It was a rejection so total, so complete, it stole her breath. He had not just pushed her away. He had erased the last 5 months. He had erased the night she had read his journal. He had erased the moment he had stitched her leg. He had erased the kiss on her palm. He had erased the warmth of their bodies, tangled in the night. He had never wanted her. He had endured her. Clara lay in the cot, the furs smelling of him, and she wept. She wept in silence, her body shaking, until there were no tears left. She wept for her own foolishness. She, who had believed love could save Silas, had done it again. She had believed this silent mountain man, this broken soldier, had seen her, had chosen her. She had been wrong. She was no one's treasure. She was just a burden, to be passed from one man to the next. For 3 days, they lived in that cold, agonizing silence. It was worse than the beginning. The beginning had been the silence of strangers. This was the silence of betrayal. He was polite. He gave her food. He spoke when spoken to. Yes, no. The water is low. He was a ghost. He was the man who had been before she had arrived. She packed her small carpet bag, her few things, the little carved elk, the bird. She held them in her hand, her heart breaking. She put them back on the mantel. They were not hers. They were from a life she had imagined. On the 4th day, he came. She heard the horse first, a sound that did not belong, the clink of a shod hoof on rock. Ewan was outside, splitting wood. He stopped, the axe in his hand. Thomas rode into the clearing. He was clean. His shirt was white. He wore a town hat. He looked at the cabin, at the pelts, at Ewan, and his face was a mask of pure disgust. He swung down from his horse. "Clara," he bellowed, "get your things. You are leaving this sty." Clara came to the door. She stood there, her packed bag at her feet. She looked at Thomas, her brother, who looked at her as if she were dirt, and she looked at Ewan, who stood by the woodpile, his face blank, his axe held loose in one hand. He was just watching. "Thomas," she said. "Do not speak," he snapped. He walked past her, into the cabin. He looked around, his nose wrinkled. He saw the cot, the single cot. He saw the furs, the intimacy of the small space. His eyes went cold. He turned and looked at her. You harlot, we sent you here to reflect on your sin, and you just find a new one, in a hole with an animal. You have shamed us. You have shamed our name for the last time." He has been good to me," Clara whispered, clutching the doorframe. "He saved my life." "He saved your life?" Thomas laughed, a short, ugly sound. "He has been using you. Look at this place, living in filth. You will be cleaned. You will be decently married." "Married?" "Aye, father has arranged it. A farmer, in Missouri. A good, pious man. A widower. He needs a woman for his house and his children. He is willing to take you, despite this." He waved a hand around the cabin. "Despite your stain." He was selling her. Her father was selling her. To a stranger, in Missouri. She looked at Ewan. "Please, Ewan, say something. Look at me. Do not let this happen." Ewan did not look at her. He looked at Thomas. He looked at the horse. And then he turned, slowly, and sank his axe into the splitting block. He leaned on it, indifferent, as if he were watching a weather front move in. He was dismissing himself. He was letting her go. That was the blow that broke her. Not her father's judgment, not her brother's hate. It was Ewan's silence. "No," Clara whispered, tears welling. "I will not go." Thomas grabbed her arm. His fingers bit into her flesh. "You will. You are our blood. You will obey. You have caused enough pain." "Ewan!" she cried out. One last, desperate plea. Ewan turned his head. He looked at her, his eyes as gray and empty as the winter sky. And then he turned away. He walked to the fire, which was smoking. and bent to add a small log. He was tending his fire. His task was done. She was no longer his concern. She was heartbroken. She let Thomas pull her. She was numb. He grabbed her bag, threw it at his horse, and hauled her up onto the saddle behind him. "You will be watched, every minute, until you are on that wagon," he spat. She did not look back. She could not. To look back would be to see the man she loved, the man who had held her and stitched her and kissed her palm, watching her be taken like a stray dog, and doing nothing. She fixed her eyes on her brother's rigid, hateful back, and the world dissolved into a blur of tears. The ride down the mountain was a torment. The world was bursting with life. The snow was melting, the ground was soft and wet, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. It smelled of Ewan. Every rock, every tree, was a memory. The clearing where he had taught her to shoot, the creek where she had fallen. Thomas spoke the entire way, a long, biting sermon about her duty, her shame, her wickedness, how her mother wept, how her father's heart was hardened by her will, how this farmer in Missouri was her last chance at decency. She did not hear him. She just heard the silence from the man she had left. They reached the town at dusk. It was loud. Wagons, men shouting, saloon music. It was too much. It assaulted her senses. She felt sick. They went to the inn. Her father and mother were there. In the small, private parlor. They were waiting. Her father stood, his face a thundercloud. Her mother sat, her hands folded, looking at the floor. "It is done," Thomas said. "She is here." "You will be confined to your room," her father said. His voice was the one he used for judgment. "The wagon leaves in 2 days. You will be on it." Clara said nothing. She was a ghost. She let her mother lead her up the stairs to a small, cold room. Her mother did not look at her. She just pointed to the bed. "Rest and pray for your soul." She left, and Clara heard the key turn in the lock. She sat on the lumpy mattress. She was a prisoner. She was being shipped west like cargo, and the man who held her heart, the man who had taught her to be strong, had let it happen. He had let her go. Back on the mountain, the sun set. The cabin grew dark. Ewan sat on his stool. The fire was dying. He had not moved since she had left. The cabin was silent. It was not the shared, warm quiet he had come to know. It was the other silence, the old one, the one from before, the one he had lived with for 10 years, the one that smelled of pine and loneliness and iron. But it was worse now. It was not just empty, it was hollowed out. He heard the wind, he heard the drip of the thaw, and he heard the ringing in his ear. From Petersburg. It was loud, louder than it had been in months. He looked around the small room. His cot was empty. The table was empty. His life was empty. His eyes landed on the mantel, on a small, carved piece of pine, a bird. Next to it, an elk. He picked up the elk. It was smooth. He had made it for her. He had seen her in the wood. He sank to his knees. The stone floor was cold. He held the small, wooden animal, and the wall he had built around his heart, the one he had been hiding behind all his life, did not just crack, it shattered. He had not cried when Jonah died. He had not cried when he had woken up buried alive. He had not cried in 10 years. He cried now. He knelt on the floor of his empty cabin, holding a piece of wood, and he wept. He wept for his own cowardice. He had let her go. He, who had survived a war, was a coward. He had been so afraid of losing her, so certain that the world took everything he loved, that he had given her away to save himself the pain of her being taken. And in doing so, he had torn out his own heart. He realized, with a clarity that was like a blade, that the silence he had cherished for a decade was no longer a comfort. It was a tomb, and she had been the only light in it. He did not think, he did not plan, he moved. He grabbed his rifle. He did not take a coat. He did not take food. He kicked open his own door and ran to the lean-to. He threw the saddle on his mule, his hands fumbling, his heart pounding a wild, desperate rhythm. He rode. He did not ride. He flew. He did not follow the path. He cut down the mountain, sliding down scree slopes, forcing the mule through half-frozen creeks, driven by a single, desperate need. He had to get her back. The mule fell, throwing him. He landed hard on his shoulder, his head cracking against a rock. He tasted blood. He did not care. He got up, dragged the mule to its feet, and kept going. He rode all night, a wild man, a ghost, driven by a singular purpose. He got to the town just before midnight. The streets were dark, save for the inn. He did all right his mule in the street, its sides heaving. He was covered in mud, his face was cut, his clothes were torn. He was wild-eyed, half mad with fear and rage. He did not knock. He kicked the front door of the inn open. It slammed against the wall, splintering the frame. In the parlor, Clara's father, her brother, and the Reverend Davies were sitting with glasses of whiskey. They leaped to their feet. "What is the meaning of this?" Josiah, her father, bellowed. Ewan stood in the doorway. He was a terrifying sight. He was the mountain come to town. He was mud and blood and fury. His rifle was in his hand. "Where is she?" he growled. "You!" Thomas stepped forward. "You filth! Get out of this place! The harlot is—" Ewan moved faster than Thomas could see. He did not use the rifle. He backhanded him. The sound of the blow was like a pistol shot. Thomas spun and crashed over a table, scattering the glasses. "I said," Ewan breathed, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Where is she?" From the top of the stairs, a door rattled. "Ewan! Ewan!" He heard her. He bounded up the stairs, ignoring her father's shouts. He got to the locked door. He did not pause. He hit it with his shoulder. The lock gave, the wood splintering. Clara was there, in her nightdress, her face pale, her eyes wide. He stopped. All the fury, all the wildness, left him. He just looked at her. He was shaking. He dropped the rifle. It clattered on the floor. "Clara," he whispered. It was a prayer. Her father and the Reverend were on the stairs behind him. "Sir, you will not. She is our daughter. She is under our protection." Ewan did not turn. He was still looking at Clara. He saw her, pale and trembling, a prisoner in her own family. He saw the judgment in her father's eyes. He saw the piety of the Reverend. "Protection?" Ewan said, his voice quiet, but it filled the hall. "You call this protection?" He turned. "You," he said to her father. "You talk of God. You hide behind your book, and you threw her away. You sent your own blood to the mountain, in winter, to die. You sent her to me as a punishment." He stepped back, pulling Clara behind him, shielding her with his body. "Well, she survived. She survived your hate. She survived your judgment. She survived a winter that would have killed you. She survived a mountain lion. She stitched her own leg, almost, after a fall. She is stronger than any of you, and you are not fit to speak her name." "She is our daughter," her father began. "She is not your daughter!" Ewan roared, his voice breaking with a passion he did not know he had. She is... He turned to Clara, his wild eyes full of a desperate, pleading, terrible love. He grabbed her arms. "Clara, you are no one's punishment," he choked out, the words tearing from his throat. "You are the only light I have got." Clara looked at his face, the cut, the mud, the desperation, the love that he had hidden, the love he had been terrified of. It was here. He had come. He had come for her. She did not just cry. She sobbed, a deep, wrenching sound that came from the bottom of her soul. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his muddy, cold shirt, and she held on. "Take me home," she wept. "Ewan, please, take me home." "I am," he said, his arms crushing her to him. He lifted her. He did not care that she was in her nightdress. He did not care that her family was shouting. He carried her down the stairs, past her stunned father, past her brother who was groaning on the floor. He walked out the door, into the cold night air. He put her on the mule, and he swung up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her, and he turned the mule back toward the mountain. The ride back was harsh. It was cold. She was shivering, but he was a furnace behind her. He held her tight, his chin resting on her head. They did not speak. There were no words. There was only the sound of the mule's hooves on the dark, wet trail, and the steady, pounding beat of his heart against her back. When the sun came up, she turned her head. She looked at his rough, bearded face, at the cut on his cheek, and she smiled. It was not the small, hesitant smile of the winter. It was a real smile, a full smile. She was not a prisoner being taken to a grave. She was a woman, riding home. They reached the cabin. It was cold. The fire was dead ash. He slid off the mule, and he lifted her down. He carried her inside. He did not put her down. He just stood in the center of the room, holding her, as if he was afraid that if he let her go, she would vanish. "Ewan," she whispered. He looked at her, and his face was full of reverence. He set her on her feet. They stood there, exhausted, muddy, and emotionally raw. They had been to hell and back. He reached out, his hand shaking, and he touched her face. He touched her like she was the first light of dawn. "I choose this," she whispered, her voice thick. "I choose you." He did not speak. He bent his head and kissed her. It was not the gentle, reverent kiss on her palm. It was not the fumbling of Silas. It was a kiss of pure, desperate, starving truth. It was the kiss of a man who had been dying of thirst and had just found water. It was rough and beard-scratched, and it tasted of blood and dirt and night, and it was the most real thing she had ever felt. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. They had chosen. Slowly, his rough, clumsy fingers went to the row of tiny buttons on her thin town nightdress. He fumbled with them, his hands shaking. She did not wait. She reached up, and her trembling fingers found the leather thong of his buckskin shirt. She began to unlace it. It was not a hurried, frantic thing. It was slow. It was reverent. They undressed each other. He pushed the thin cotton from her shoulders. It fell, pooling at her feet. He looked at her. He saw the pale, silver scar on her hand. He saw the long, puckered, reddish line on her thigh, the one his own needle had sewn. He saw her, the woman who had survived. She pulled the rough shirt from his shoulders. She saw the scars on his arms. And then she saw his back. The skin was a ruined map of old wounds, puckered and white, from the mine blast. She saw the man who had been buried. She reached out and put her hand, her palm, flat against the worst of the scars on his back. He shuddered, a deep, full-body tremor, and his eyes closed. He lifted her. He carried her to the cot. He laid her on the furs, and he followed, covering her body with his. He looked down at her, his face full of a wonder she could not name. They came together. It was not a taking. It was a giving. It was a slow, raw, reverent act of two broken, lonely people who had been thrown away by the world. Finally, choosing each other. It was the sealing of a bond. It was the lighting of a fire in the cold, dark cabin. It was the only promise that mattered. And outside, the sun rose, and the last of the winter's ice, the stubborn, hard ice, finally let go and began to melt. The cabin was no longer a hole in the ground. It was a home. The change was not in the stones or the sod, but in the air inside. It was shared. Spring turned to summer. The high country bloomed with a fierce, fast life. The meadows were carpets of blue lupine and red paintbrush. The air was warm, smelling of pine resin and melting snow. And for the first time in her life, Clara was not afraid. She and Ewan had settled into a rhythm that was as steady as the sun. They woke together, their bodies tangled in the furs, a slow, warm waking. He would rise first, stir the fire, and his first move was always to touch her hair. A rough, gentle brush of his fingers. A silent, "Good morning." A silent, "You are still here." He was her partner. He was her husband in all but name. He was her teacher. He taught her the things he knew. He saw her looking at the small carved animals on the mantel. One day, he gave her a small, sharp knife of her own and a piece of soft aspen wood. "Hands need to be busy," he said. "Idle hands. They get into trouble. They start to ring. Better to make something." So she sat by him in the long, light evenings. At first, her work was clumsy. The wood split. She cut her fingers. Her bird looked more like a rock. He never laughed. He would just take her hand, turn the wood, and show her. Let the knife do the work. See the grain. It tells you where to cut. She learned. She was patient. She had a good eye. She carved a small, passable spoon, and then a bowl. And then, one day, she carved a tiny, perfect pine cone. He picked it up, turned it over in his huge, scarred palm, and he nodded, that small, slow nod that was his highest praise. "Good," he said. He put it on the mantel, next to his elk. She, in turn, taught him from the book, the old, tattered book on high country plants. She would go out, her skirts hiked up, and gather yarrow for fevers, comfrey for bruises, willow bark for pain. She made salves, like the one he had used on her hand. She made teas. She dried herbs, hanging them from the rafters. And the cabin began to smell not just of smoke and man, but of mint and sage. "You are a witch woman," he'd tease, his voice a low rumble. "I am a practical woman," she'd reply, not looking up. "And you are a man who gets cuts. Sit still." They worked. They were preparing. They both knew, without saying it, that they were not just surviving this season. They were preparing for a life. The winter had been a test. This was the reward. "The lean-to is weak," Ewan said one morning, looking at the mule's shelter. "A heavy snow will take it." "Then we should build a new one," she said. "A shed," he said, his eyes distant. "A proper one. For the wood, too. Keep it dry." "Yes," she said. And so they built. He felled the trees, smaller lodgepole pines. He taught her how to notch them. She helped him peel the bark, her arms aching, her hands sticky with sap. They worked side by side. She was not the delicate girl who had been dropped on his doorstep. She was strong. The mountain air, the hard work, the steady food. It had put muscle on her. She would hold the logs while he set them. He would lift, his muscles straining, and she would be there, ready with the chinking, a mix of mud and grass she had prepared. They did not talk much. They did not need to. They moved together. Lift, set, hold, pack. It was a dance. In a month, it was done. A solid four-sided shed with a tight roof. It was sturdy. It was strong. It was theirs. They stood back, looking at it, their hands on their hips. "It will hold," he said. "Yes," she said, "it will." That night, their coming together was different. It was not the desperate, raw passion of their first night. It was the slow, sure comfort of two people who had built something together. It was sweat and earth and shared accomplishment. It was solid. The world below left them alone. They were a rumor, the mountain man and the widow. They did not care. But the world below had a long memory. In July, a man rode into their clearing. He was not a trapper. He wore a blue coat, faded and dusty, with brass buttons. He looked official. He looked tired. Ewan came out of the cabin, his rifle held easy in his hand, not threatening, just there. "Ewan McCrae?" the man asked. squinting. "Hi, my name is Silas Poole. I'm with the Department of War Pensions Office." He pulled a sheaf of papers from his saddlebag. "Been looking for you for 2 years. You were listed as dead, then not dead, then gone west. Took me a year to find a trapper who knew where you'd gone." Ewan just waited, his face a mask. "You are owed," Mr. Poole said, wiping his neck. "A bounty for re-enlistment and back pay and a partial payment for your injury. The mine at Petersburg. Your captain filed the papers, said you were the only one of your company left to claim it." He held out the papers. Ewan looked at them. He looked at the man. He did not move. "I want nothing from them." Mr. Poole sighed. "Son, it is $500. That is a lot of money." I said. Ewan's voice was low. "I want nothing. They took my friend. They took my hearing. They took 10 years of my life. I ain't taking their money. Tell them to keep it." Clara had come to the doorway. She was listening. $500. It was a fortune. It was a house. It was a life. "Mr. McCrae," Poole said, "it is your due. You earned it, the hard way, from what I read." "I earn nothing but the ground I stand on." Ewan said, "You rode a long way for nothing." "Good day." He turned to go back inside. "Ewan," Clara said. He stopped. He did not turn. She stepped out, into the sun. She looked at Mr. Poole, and then at her husband's rigid back. "Ewan," she said again, her voice quiet but clear. "The man you were, the soldier, maybe he does not want it. Maybe he has no use for it." She walked to him. She put her hand on his arm. He was tense as a strung wire. "But that money is not for him," she whispered, "for his ears only. That man is gone. That money is for us. It is for the man who builds sheds. It is for the man who carves birds. It is for our future." She paused. "Let that life pay for this one." He stood there for a full minute. She felt the muscle in his arm twitch. He was fighting himself, fighting the past. Slowly, he turned. He looked at her. He saw the pleading in her eyes, the hope. She was not asking for herself. She was asking for them. He let out a long breath, the breath he had been holding for 10 years. He turned to Mr. Poole. He took the papers. He took the bank draft. He did not look at it. He just nodded. "Thank you for your trouble." Mr. Poole looked relieved. "No trouble. Son, glad to find you. Glad to see you. Well," he tipped his hat to Clara, and he rode away. Ewan stood there, holding the paper. It felt strange in his hand, tainted. Clara put her hand on his. "You did the right thing." He looked at the paper. $500. He shook his head. "Jonah, he died for nothing, and they give me this." "He died," Clara said softly, "so that you could live. So, let us live." He folded the paper. He put it in his pocket. He put his arm around her, and they went inside. The money changed things. It was a possibility. It was a choice. "This cabin," Ewan said one night, "it is too small. For winter, it is dark." "We could build onto it," Clara said, her voice hesitant. She had been dreaming. "Aye," he said. He pulled a burnt stick from the fire. On a clean piece of pine board, he began to draw. We could use the money, buy glass, for a window, a real one." "And stone," she said, her eyes bright. "Ewan, we could build a real fireplace, one that fills the room." "Here," he drew a large square. "A new room. Here. We will cut into the hill, and the fireplace will be the heart of it." They planned. They sat close, their heads bent over the rough drawing. They planned a life. They would go to Laramie in the fall. They would buy glass and milled lumber for a proper floor, and seed. "A garden," Clara said, her voice full of longing. I could have a garden right by the door with potatoes and herbs." "We will," he said. He looked at her, at the firelight on her face, at the hope. He had never seen her look so young, so unbroken. "We will build a home, Clara." He was happy. He had not known what the feeling was. It was this quiet, solid thing, this planning, this her. The world below, however, had other things besides money. It came with the fall. The nights were getting cold. The aspen were turning a brilliant, burning yellow. A trapper passed, far below in the valley, and Ewan had gone down to trade pelts for salt and coffee. He came back, and his face was tight, the way it had been when the lion came. "What is it?" Clara asked, her heart stopping. Not my family again." "No," he said. He dropped the sacks on the floor. "Sickness, in Laramie, and down the valley. A fever. The trapper said, folks are dying, a lung sickness. It is fast." Clara felt a chill. She put her hand to her throat. "We are safe here," Ewan said, too quickly. "We are on the mountain. The air is clean. It will not touch us." He was trying to convince himself. But the sickness did not need a road. It traveled on the air. It traveled in the water. It traveled in the body of a man who had passed through the valley. It came a week later. Clara woke up, and she was cold. She was freezing. Her teeth were chattering. She huddled under the furs, but she could not get warm. "Ewan?" He was up instantly. He touched her forehead. It was burning. "No," he said, a single word, a denial. "I am just cold," she whispered. But by noon, she was delirious. The fever took her fast. She was burning, her skin dry. She tossed in the cot, her hair plastered to her head. And then the cough started, a dry, hacking sound that tore at her lungs. Ewan was frantic. He was a man of action. He knew how to fight bears, men, weather. He did not know how to fight this invisible thing. He did what he could. He piled furs on her when she shivered. He stripped them off when she burned. He used her own medicines, the willow bark tea, the yarrow. He forced sips between her cracked lips. She did not wake. She was in the war with him. She was at Petersburg. She called for Jonah. She called for Silas. She called for her mother. He sat by the cot, his hands clenched. Useless. He was watching her die, the way he had watched Jonah die, and he could do nothing. For 2 days, he sat. He did not sleep. He watched her get weaker. The cough was wet now, a terrible, rattling sound. Her breathing was shallow. "Clara," he begged, his voice rough. "Clara, fight! Do not leave me! You hear me? Do not you leave me!" She did not hear him. She was too far away. On the 3rd night, he knew. He had seen this look before. The skin was pale, waxy. The breathing was slowing. Death was in the room. It was standing in the corner, waiting. He could not accept it. He looked outside. A storm was blowing in. A cold, autumn rain, the kind that would be snow in the high country. The wind was howling. He looked at Clara. He looked at the door. He had to go. He could not sit and watch. He kissed her forehead. It was hot, like fire. "I will be back. You wait. You hear me? Clara, you wait for me." He grabbed his coat, his rifle, and the bank draft. He ran to the mule. He did not saddle it. He just leaped on its back. He rode. He did not ride like he had for her. He rode like a demon. He did not care for the path. He did not care for the storm. The rain turned to sleet, sharp and cold, cutting his face. The mule slid, falling, scrambling. Ewan did not care. He was riding against the reaper. He got to Laramie in the dark. He was a madman. He was soaked, covered in mud, his face bleeding from a branch. He slammed into the doctor's house, kicking the door. "Doctor!" he roared. A small, sleepy man in a nightshirt opened the door. "Dr. Miller." "What in God's name?" Ewan grabbed him by the shirt. He was huge, terrifying, and desperate. "My wife, she is dying. The fever. You will come. Now." "Sir, I cannot. It is the middle of the night. There is a storm." Ewan shoved the bank draft, the $500 note, into the man's chest. It was wet and crumpled. "That is yours. All of it. If you come. If you do not, I will haul you. Choose." The doctor looked at the money. He looked at the wild, desperate eyes of the mountain man. He sighed. "Let me get my bag." The ride back was a nightmare. The doctor was not a rider. Ewan half dragged, half carried him. The mule was exhausted. Ewan did not care. He pushed, he pulled, he threatened, he begged. He got the man up the mountain. They burst into the cabin. The fire was low. Clara was on the cot. She was not moving. "Oh, Lord," the doctor whispered. Seeing her, he was afraid. "Fix her," Ewan growled. The doctor, to his credit, went to work. He was a good man. He was just a tired one. He pulled out his stethoscope. He listened. He pulled out quinine. He pulled out laudanum. He worked. Ewan just stood. He stood by the fire, dripping, shaking, his rifle in his hand. He just watched. For a full day, they fought. The doctor worked. Ewan fetched water. He kept the fire hot. Clara, she did not move. "It is in God's hands now, son," the doctor said, wiping his face. "I have done all I can. She is very weak. The fever must break." That night, Ewan sent the doctor to the loft. He sat by the cot. He took her hand. It was limp. It was cold. He bowed his head. He did not pray. He did not know how. He just talked. He whispered to her, his head bent, his rough beard brushing her hand. "Clara, you cannot go. I was dead. I was dead for 10 years. In that trench. I just kept walking. And then you came. You woke me up. You are the only light I have got. You said it. You said it." His voice broke. A sob, a dry, terrible sound, tore from his chest. "If you go," he whispered, his confession to her dying ear. "I will not go on living. I will not. I will follow. I cannot be in the dark again. I will not." He sat there, holding her hand, his shoulders shaking, as the storm raged outside and the fever raged inside. He must have fallen asleep, his head on the cot, his hand holding hers. He woke to a sound, a single, weak cough. He looked up. Clara's eyes were open. They were not clear, but they were open. She was looking at him. He could not breathe. She tried to speak. Her lips were cracked. "Water," he rasped. He grabbed the cup. He lifted her head. She drank. She coughed, but she drank. The fever had broken. She survived. It was not a miracle. It was a war. She was weak. She was thin as a rail. She had been on the edge, and he had pulled her back. For a week, she lay there, slowly, coming back to the world. The doctor had stayed 2 days, then left, his pockets heavy, his head shaking at the madness of the mountain man. Ewan cared for her. He fed her broth. He washed her face. He did not leave her side. He was gentle. He was tender. He was terrified. One afternoon, she was strong enough to sit up, propped against the wall. She was watching him. He was stirring a pot of thin rabbit stew. He looked different. He caught her watching him, and he stopped. He touched his face, his jaw, self-consciously. "Oh," she whispered. He had shaved his beard. Sometime, in the depth of her fever, he had taken his razor and shaved it all off. The thick, unruly mountain man beard was gone. His face was his face. She had never seen it. He had a strong jaw, a square chin, scars, but his mouth, he had a kind mouth. He looked 10 years younger. He looked human. He smiled. It was not a grimace. It was not a lifting of the lips. It was a smile. It was awkward and rusty, and it was the most beautiful thing she had in her life ever seen. It was scratchy, he mumbled, his face turning a dark red. When I was putting the cloth on your head, I thought maybe it was bothering you. Clara looked at this man, this stranger, this man she knew better than her own soul, this man who had ridden into a storm, who had given up a fortune, who had shaved his own identity away, just to comfort her. She began to cry. Not tears of sadness, not tears of pain, tears of everything. "Hey, now," he said, panicked, wiping his hands and rushing to her. "What is it? Does it hurt? The fever?" "No," she whispered, laughing and crying at the same time. She reached up and touched his smooth, rough chin. "No, Ewan, it does not hurt at all." He looked at her, at the tears on her cheeks, and his awkward smile softened. He understood. He sat on the edge of the cot. He did not kiss her. He did not hold her. He just sat there and let her touch his new face. The passion of their union, that first night, had been a bond. It had been fire. But this was different. This was the night he had confessed to her sleeping ear. This was the ride in the storm. This was the shaved beard and the awkward smile. This was not fire. This was iron, forged in pain, cooled in fear, and now unbreakable. Their bond was no longer just passion. It was sealed. Clara healed. The mountain, which had tested her and broken her and nearly taken her, now gave her its strength. The fever was gone, but it had left its mark. She was thinner, but her eyes were clearer. The last of the girl she had been, the one who had run off with Silas Vaughn, was gone. The woman who remained was Ewan's, and he was hers. Their life, that autumn, was one of quiet, steady work. The plan they had made, the one drawn on the pine board, became real. Ewan rode to Laramie, his face clean-shaven, his back straight, and he was not the wild mountain man. He was Mr. McCrae. He was a man with a purpose and a bank draft. He bought glass, a pane of it, thick and precious. He bought milled boards for a floor, hinges of real iron, nails, and seed for the spring. He spent the money not as a bounty, but as an investment in the life Clara had given back to him. They worked together. They cut back into the hill, expanding the cabin, making a new, larger room. They laid the floorboards, Ewan showing Clara how to set the nails, her hammer blows falling true. The day he set the glass window was a celebration. Light, real, clear sunlight flooded the cabin. It was no longer a den. It was a room. He built the fireplace, his big scarred hands proving as careful with stone as they were with wood. He set the rocks, one by one, sealing them with the mud and clay Clara mixed. When they lit the first fire, it drew perfectly. A column of smoke rising straight, the heat rolling out, filling the new space with a warm, dancing light. It was a home. They were happy. It was a word Clara had never truly understood. It was not the breathless, giggling joy of her youth. It was this solid, warm, quiet feeling. It was knowing where you belonged. It was waking in the night, cold, and feeling his arm pull her closer, his breath on her hair, and knowing she was safe. It was watching him across the table, his new, clean-shaven face serious as he mended a trap, and feeling a love so deep it ached. The first snows of the next winter had just begun to dust the peaks. They were ready. The shed was full of wood. The new room was finished. The cabin was tight and warm. They were finally prepared for whatever the world sent. And then the world sent one last test. It came with Jedediah Potts, the trapper, He did not come up to the cabin. He respected their privacy now, but he left a packet at the base of their trail, wedged in a tree. Ewan found it when he was checking his lower lines. It was a letter from Laramie. He brought it inside, holding it out to Clara. He did not speak. His face was quiet. Clara's hands trembled as she took it. It was addressed to Mrs. Clara Vaughn, but the name felt like a stranger's. She broke the seal. It was not from her brother. It was from Dr. Miller. My dear Mrs. McCrae, it began. He had given her Ewan's name. I write with heavy news. The fever that so gravely afflicted you has returned to the valley. Your father, Josiah, has been taken by it. He is not long for this world. He has been asking for you. He is repentant. He begs for your presence, that he might ask your forgiveness and find his peace. Your mother and brother are with him, but it is for you he calls. Clara sat on the stool, the letter shaking in her hand. Her father, dying. The man who had judged her, the man who had cast her out. She had made her peace with that part of her life. She had cut it off. She had buried it under the snow, just as they had tried to bury her. And now, it was calling her back. Ewan watched her. He had not read the letter, but he saw her face. He came and knelt before her. The way he had that day he had kissed her palm. He took her hands. What is it, Clara? My father, she whispered. He is dying. The fever. He is asking for me. He wants my forgiveness. Ewan just held her hands. He did not tell her what to do. He did not tell her to stay. He did not tell her the man deserved to be alone. He waited. I do not know if I can, she whispered, tears welling. Ewan, he sent me here to die. Aye, Ewan said, his voice soft. He did. And now he wants me to come to him, to ease his passing. It is not fair. No, Ewan said. It ain't. Nothing about it is. He gently squeezed her fingers. But it ain't about him. Clara, not really. It is about you. You go or you stay. You do it for you. Whatever you choose. I am here. Whatever you choose. It is the right choice. He gave her the one thing her father never had, the freedom to choose. She looked at this man kneeling at her feet, this man who had ridden into a storm for her, who had faced down her family, this man who trusted her. She stood. I have to go. He nodded. I know. Get your coat. He rode with her. He did not let her go alone. They rode down the mountain that was now their fortress. The air was cold, the sky a sharp, clear blue. When they reached the edge of Laramie, he pulled his mule to a stop. This is as far as I go, he said. She looked at him, startled. This is your world, he said, gesturing to the muddy street, the gray buildings. This is your business, your blood. You do what you must. I will not stand in your shadow. I will not let them judge you by me. He looked at her, his eyes full of a solid, unwavering trust. I will be right here. When you are done, I will be waiting. She nodded. She understood. He was not abandoning her. He was showing her he knew she was strong enough to face them, and that he was strong enough to wait. She dismounted and walked into Laramie. It was as if she were a ghost. The townspeople, the ones who had known her as Josiah's daughter, as Silas's widow, stopped. They whispered. They pointed. That is her, the Vaughn girl, the one who shamed her family. Look at her. She has been up there, with him, all this time. Coming back now, is she, now that her father is on his deathbed? Shameless. Clara heard them. A year ago, those whispers would have broken her. They would have sent her running, her face hot with shame. Now, she did not even blink. She walked with her head high. Her boots, the ones Ewan had mended, were solid on the boardwalk. She was not the Vaughn girl. She was not Silas's widow. She was Clara McCrae, and these people, with their small, gray lives and their sharp, bitter words, they were nothing. They were just noise. Her world was rock and pine, and a man who was waiting for her. She walked to the inn. She opened the door. The place smelled of sickness and stale whiskey. Her brother, Thomas, was at the bottom of the stairs, slumped in a chair. He looked up. His face was not angry. It was just empty. He was 10 years older. The fever had burned the pride right out of him. He just looked at her. "He is upstairs," Thomas said, his voice a dull rasp. "He has been calling for you." Her mother, Miriam, came out of the parlor. She was a wraith. Her black dress hung on her. Her hair was gray. She just looked at Clara, and her thin lips trembled. She did not open her arms. She just wrung her hands. "He is waiting." Clara walked up the stairs. She felt nothing, not anger, not fear, just a cold, sad emptiness. This was the life they had chosen, a life of judgment and bitterness. And now, this. She opened the door to the room. Her father, Josiah, was a mountain of a man, a voice of thunder, a will of iron. The man in the bed was a tiny, shrunken thing. His skin was yellow, his breath a wet, shallow rattle. The fire and brimstone were gone. All that was left was a very small, very old, very frightened man. He turned his head, his eyes cloudy and dim. Found her. "Clara," he whispered. The sound was like dry leaves. She came and stood by the bed. He fumbled for her hand. His was hot, dry as paper. He clutched her. "Clara, you came! You look strong." "I am, Father." His eyes filled with tears. They ran, hot, down his hollowed-out cheeks. I was wrong," he wept. "I was a proud, foolish old man. I read the book, but I did not see the words. I saw only my own judgment." He coughed, a terrible, racking sound. "I threw you away," he choked out. "My own child, my shame, my sin, not yours, mine. I am dying, Clara, and I am so afraid. I cannot meet my God, not like this. I need your peace. Please, child, forgive me." He was sobbing, clinging to her hand, this man who had never shown her a moment of tenderness. Clara looked at him, the great, terrible giant of her childhood. He was just a dying animal, and he was terrified. She did not feel anger. She did not feel love. She just felt a profound, bottomless pity. He had wasted his whole life on pride. She put her other hand on top of his. "I forgive you, Father," he gasped, a desperate, relieved sound. "You do. You will stay. Your mother, she has no one. Thomas, he is—" Clara gently pulled her hand away. "I forgive you. I am here to say goodbye, but I am not staying." He looked confused. "But this is your home." "No," Clara said, her voice quiet, but as firm as the mountain stone. "My home is not here. My home is in the mountains. My life is with Ewan." He looked at her. He saw the woman she had become, the strength, the peace. He saw that he had no more power over her. He had no more judgment to give. "He is a good man?" he whispered. "He is the best man I have ever known," she said. Josiah nodded. He closed his eyes. "That is good." He clutched her hand one last time. "Peace? I am at peace." He let out a long, slow breath, and he was gone. Clara stood there for a moment. She looked at the shell of the man who had ruled her life. She felt released. She leaned down. She kissed his damp forehead. "Goodbye, Father." She turned and walked out of the room. Her mother and Thomas were in the hall. They looked at her, their faces questioning. "He is gone," she said. "He is at peace." Her mother let out a small, quiet sob. Thomas just stared at the floor. "Clara," her mother began, "you will stay for the funeral." "No, Mother," Clara said, her voice gentle. "I will not. My place is not here. Thomas will see to you." She walked down the stairs. She walked out of the inn. She did not look back. She walked through the muddy street, past the whispering people. She did not hear them. She was walking toward the light. He was there, just as he had promised. At the edge of town, he was sitting on his mule, her mare waiting beside him. He was not looking at the town. He was looking at the mountains. He heard her boots on the road. He turned. He did not ask. He did not say, "Is he gone?" or "Are you all right?" He just looked at her, and he held out his hand, his big, scarred, steady hand. She took it. It was warm. It was strong. He pulled her, and she swung up into her saddle. "Let's go home," she said. He nodded. As they turned to leave, they passed the doctor's small house. Dr. Miller was on his porch, smoking a pipe, looking exhausted. He saw them. "Mrs. McCrae, my condolences on your father." "Thank you, Doctor," Clara said, "for your kindness to him and to me." "It is a terrible thing, this fever," the doctor said, shaking his head. "It does not care about pride or money. It just takes. It took the Snyders, both of them. Last night." "The Snyders?" Clara said, pulling her mare to a stop. "The family in the valley, they had a child, a little girl. Mary?" The doctor's face went sad. "Aye, little Mary. She is untouched by the sickness. Seems she already had it, as a babe, but she is alone now. No kin in this territory. She is at the church. For now, the Reverend will find a place for her. An orphanage. Back east, I suppose." Clara went still, an orphan, alone, thrown away by the world, like she had been, like Ewan had been. She looked at Ewan. He was already watching her. He knew that look on her face. It was the look she had when she had told him to take the money. It was the look she had when she had woken from the fever. It was the look of a woman who knew her own mind. "Ewan?" she said, her voice quiet. He did not even let her finish. He looked at the doctor. He looked at the town. He looked at the mountain. And he looked at his wife. He nodded. "Just once. We cannot leave her." They did not go to the church. They went to the small house behind it, where the Reverend Davies lived. Clara did not knock. She walked in. Ewan was right behind her. The Reverend was at his desk. He looked up, his face sour. "Clara, I have heard you are too late." "We are not here for my father, Reverend," Clara said. Her voice was cold iron. "We are here for the girl, Mary Snyder." "The girl is a ward of the church," the Reverend said, standing. "She will be provided for." "She will," Ewan said, his voice a low rumble. He stepped forward, filling the small, dark room. He was not the clean-shaven man who had bought glass. He was the mountain. "She will be provided for, by us." The Reverend looked at Ewan's size. He looked at the cold, final set of Clara's jaw. He was a man of judgment, but he was not a fool. "She is a burden. She has nothing." "She will have us," Clara said. "Get her things." The girl, Mary, was 5 years old. She was sitting on a hard bench in the church kitchen, holding a small, stained cloth doll. She was not crying. She was just silent. She was in the same cold, empty place Clara had been 5 months ago. Clara walked to her. She knelt, so their eyes were level. "Hello, Mary," she said, her voice soft. "My name is Clara. This is Ewan." The little girl looked at Ewan. He was so big. He smiled at her, his awkward, rusty smile. "We live on the mountain," Clara said. "It is very quiet. We have a new room. with a big glass window, and the fire is always warm. We have been building a home, but it is missing something. I think it is missing you. Would you like to come home with us?" Mary looked at Clara's kind face. She looked at the giant, smiling man. She looked at her cloth doll. And then, for the first time in days, she nodded. Clara took her hand. Ewan lifted her. She was light as a feather. They rode out of Laramie, the three of them. Ewan rode first. The small girl settled in front of him, wrapped in his heavy coat, her small head resting against his chest. Clara rode beside them. They did not look back. They rode up the trail, into the high country, into the clear, cold air. They were a family, not by blood, not by law, by choice. The winter came, but it did not matter. The cabin was a beacon of light and warmth. The stone fireplace Ewan had built roared, throwing heat and light across the new wooden floor and dancing on the glass window. Outside, the snow fell, thick and silent. Inside, there was life. There was the sound of Mary, a quiet child, learning to laugh. Clara was teaching her to read. Ewan was teaching her to carve. She was asleep. Now, in a small, warm cot he had built into the wall, her cloth doll tucked beside her. Clara sat by the fire, mending one of Mary's small dresses. The light caught her hair, the silver scar on her hand. Ewan was in his usual spot, a piece of pine in his hand. He had been carving it for weeks, a secret, careful thing. He finished. He rubbed it with oil, his thumb smoothing the wood. He stood. Clara looked up. He walked to the mantel. He took down the elk, and the bird, and the pine cone. He set his new carving in the very center. It was not an animal. It was a woman, standing tall, and she was holding the hand of a small child. He looked at it. He looked at Clara, watching him, her face full of a love so deep. It was the air he breathed. He walked to her. He knelt, just as he had done before. He did not kiss her hand. He just took it, and he held it against his clean-shaven cheek. He whispered, his voice thick, his confession for her ears alone. "You are not just my treasure. Clara, you are my home." The fire crackled, the snow fell, and the cabin, the small hole in the ground that had been a prison, was full. It was full of warmth and light, and a love that was as quiet, as fierce, and as unbreakable as the mountain itself. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love for you to comment where you are listening from so you can connect with others. And we invite you to subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts.